Hello, this is Spellbinder with another story from the Gulf of Mexico oil disasters. Now it's an S. This is July 7, 2010, the Associated Press by Jeff DONN and MITCH West. Gulf of Mexico, awash in 27,000 abandoned wells. My God, no one checking for leaks despite heavy risk. I wonder if that's what's actually doing. These abandoned wells are starting to leak like hell. More than 27,000 abandoned oil and gas wells lurk in the hard rock beneath the Gulf of Mexico, an environmental minefield that has been ignored for decades. No one, not industry, not government, is checking to see if they are leaking, an Associated Press investigation shows. The oldest of these wells was abandoned in the late 40s, raising the prospect that many deteriorating seal jobs already are failing. The AP investigation uncovered particular concern with 3,500 of the neglected wells, those characterized in federal government records as temporarily abandoned. Regulations for temporary abandoned wells require oil companies to present plans to reuse or permanently plug such wells within a year, but the AP found the rule is routinely circumvented, and more than 1,000 wells have lingered in that unfinished condition for more than a decade. About 3/4 of temporary abandoned wells have been left in the status for more than a year, and many since the 1950s and 60s. Even though sealing procedures for temporary abandoned are not as strategic as those for permanent closures. As a forceful reminder of the potential harm, the wells beneath BP Deepwater Horizon rig was being sealed with cement for temporary abandonment when it blew April 20th, leading to one of the worst environmental disasters in the nation's history. BP alone has abandoned about 600 wells in the Gulf, according to the government data. Disaster waiting. There is ample reason to worry about all permanently and temporarily abandoned wells. History shows that at least on land they often leak. Wells are sealed underwater much as they are on land, and wells on the land and in the water face similar risk of failure. Plus, records reviewed by the AP show some offshore wells have failed, where maybe part of the oil spilling out there. Experts say such wells can repressurize, much like a dormant volcano can awaken, and years of exposure to seawater and underground pressure can cause cementing and piping to corrode and weaken. You can have changing geological conditions where a well could be repressurized, said Andy Radford, a petroleum engineer for the American Petroleum Institute Trade Group. Whether a well is permanently or temporarily abandoned, improperly applies, or aging cement can crack or shrink. Independent petroleum engineers say it ages just like it does on buildings and highways. And Roger Anderson, a Columbia University petroleum geologist who has conducted research on commercial wells. Despite the likelihood of leaks large and small, though, abandoned wells typically are not inspected by industry or government. Oil company representatives insist the seals on a correctly plugged offshore well will last virtually forever. It's in everybody's interest to do it right, said Bill Mintz, a spokesman for the Apache Corporation, which has at least 2,100 abandoned wells in the Gulf, according to government data. Officials at the U.S. Interior Department, which oversees the agency that regulates federal leases in the Gulf and elsewhere, did not answer repeated questions regarding why there are no inspections of abandoned wells. State officials estimate that tens of thousands are badly sealed, either because they predate strict regulations or because the operating companies violated rules. Texas alone has plugged more than 21,000 abandoned wells to control pollution, according to the state comptroller's office. Offshore, but in state waters, California has resealed scores of its abandoned wells since the 1980s. In deeper federal waters, though, despite the similarities and how the wells are constructed and how sealing procedures can fail, the official policy is out of sight, out of mind. The U.S. Mineral Management Service Regulatory Agency, recently renamed the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management Regulation and Enforcement, relies on rules that have few real teeth. Once an oil company says it will permanently abandon a well, it has 1 year to complete the job. MMS mandates work plans be submitted and reported and filed afterwards. Unlike California regulators, MMS typically doesn't inspect the jobs, instead relying on paperwork. In fact, there are so many wells that have been classified for decades as temporary abandoned, suggests paperwork can be shuffled at MMS without any real change beneath the water. With its weak system of enforcement, MMS imposed fines in a relative handful of cases, just $440,000 on 7 companies from 2003 through 2007 for improper plug and abandonment work. Companies permanently abandon wells when there is no longer useful. Afterward, no one looks methodically for leaks, which can easily be detected from the surface anyway, and no one in the government or industry goes underwater to inspect either. Government regulators and industry officials say abandoned offshore wells are presumed to be properly plugged and are expected to last indefinitely without leaking. Only when pressed do these officials acknowledge the possibility of leaks. Despite warnings of the leaks, government and industry officials have never bothered to assess the extent of the problem. According to an extensive AP review of the records and regulations, that means no one really knows how many abandoned wells are leaking and how badly. The AP document an extensive history of warnings about environmental dangers related to abandoned wells. The study targeted a well 20 miles off of Louisiana that had been reported leaking 5 years after it was plugged and abandoned. The researchers tried unsuccessfully to use satellite radar images to locate the leak, but John Amos, the geologist who wrote the study, told AP that MMS withheld critical information that could have helped verify if it had pinpointed the problem. I kind of suspect that this was a project almost designed to fail, Amos said. He said the agency refused to tell him how big and widespread the problem they were dealing with in the Gulf. Amos is now director of Sky Truth, a non-profit group that uses satellite imagery to detect environmental problems. He still thinks that technology could work on abandoned wells. MNS, however, hasn't followed up on the work. The Interior Department spokesman Kenneth Barkoff said agency inspectors would be present for permanent plugging jobs only when something unusual is expected. She also said inspectors would check later only if there is a note leak, but she did not respond to the request for example. Companies may be tempted to skip on sealing jobs, which are expensive and slow offshore. It would cost the industry at least $3 billion to permanently plug the 10,500 now active wells and the 3,500 temporary abandoned ones in the Gulf, according to the AP analysis of MMS data. The AP analysis indicates more than half of 50,000 wells ever drilled on federal leases beneath the Gulf have now been abandoned. Some 23,500 are permanently sealed. Another 12,500 wells are plugged on one branch while being allowed to remain active in a different branch. Government records do not indicate how many temporary abandoned wells have been returned to service over the years. Federal rules require an annual review of plans, refuse or permanently seal the 3,500 temporary abandoned wells, but companies are using this provision to keep the wells in limbo indefinitely. Petroleum engineers say abandoned offshore wells can fail from faulty work, age, and drilling induced natural changes below the seabed. Maurice Dessaunt, a geologist at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada, says U.S. regulators assume that once a well is sealed, they're safe, but that's not the case always. Even fully depleted wells can flow again because the fluid or gas injected to simulate nearby wells or from pressure exerted from underwater aquifers. Permanently abandoned wells are corked with cement plugs, typically 10 to 200 feet long, and are placed in target zones and blocked for oil and gas. Heavy drilling fluid is added offshore to cut off 15 feet below the seafloor. The horizon. The wells are abandoned temporarily for a variety of reasons. The company will reevaluate the well's potential plan to overcome drilling problems, damage from a storm. Some of the owners temporarily abandoning wells to await the raise of oil prices. Because the companies may put temporarily abandoned wells back into service. Such holes typically will be sealed with fewer plugs, less testing, and metal cap to stop corrosion from the seawater. In a deep water horizon blowout, investigators believe the cement may have failed, perhaps never correctly setting deep into the well. Sometimes gas bubbles such as cement hardens, providing unwanted path for gas and oil to burst through the well and reach the surface. Other key parts of the abandoned well, the steel pipe liner known as the casing, can also rust through over time. MSS personnel sometimes spot small oil patches in the Gulf flyovers. Operators are also supposed to report any oil sheens they encounter, typically through MMSS and the oil leak when someone spots it by chance. In either case, the Coast Guard's Marine Safety Laboratory handles a little more than 200 cases of oil pollution each year, and the manager, Wayne Roulard, said it's impossible to tell the leaking well from a natural seeps. Untold thousands of barrels of oil and untold millions of cubic feet of gas escape annually through cracks that permeate the seafloor. AP investigative report.